An abused little girl stood barefoot on a freezing porch while the whole town looked away. She thought no one would ever save her until a quiet millionaire stopped walking, stepped between her and danger, and made one decision that would change both of their lives forever. In Briar Glen, Vermont, autumn always arrived quietly. Maple trees lining the narrow streets turned from green to shades of copper and gold, their leaves drifting across sidewalks where neighbors greeted each other with coffee and small talk before work. From the outside, it looked like the kind of town where nothing truly terrible could happen. But every town has one house people avoid looking at too closely. At the end of Alder Street stood a small blue house with peeling paint and crooked wooden steps. The porch sagged slightly, and empty bottles sometimes rolled against the railing when the wind blew hard enough. Children walking to school learned to cross the street instead of passing in front of it. Inside that house lived 9-year-old Ilara Quinn. For Ilara, mornings were not peaceful. They were careful. She woke before sunrise every day not because she wanted to, but because she had learned that listening could mean survival. The sound of her mother's footsteps could signal anything: anger shouting or the sharp crack of something thrown against a wall. That Tuesday morning, the air carried the first real chill of fall. Ilara stepped onto the porch barefoot, wearing an oversized gray t-shirt that hung past her knees. A faded purple backpack with a broken zipper slid off her shoulder as she struggled to drag 2 overfilled trash bags down the porch steps. Inside the house, a glass shattered. "Move faster, you useless girl," a woman screamed. A green bottle flew through the open door and smashed against the railing beside Ilara. She flinched, dropping the trash bag as garbage spilled across the wood. But she didn't cry. Instead, she knelt down quickly and gathered the mess with small, practiced hands. Because crying, she had learned long ago, only made things worse. At exactly 6:08 that same morning, Rowan Mercer turned onto Alder Street during his daily walk. Rowan was 47 years old, wealthy enough to never work again, and known in Briar Glen as the quiet millionaire on Mercer Hill. Years earlier, he had built a successful technology company, sold it, and disappeared from public life soon afterward. But money was not the reason he kept to himself. Loss was. His wife and unborn daughter had died in a car accident nearly a decade earlier, leaving Rowan with a silence so heavy he eventually built his entire life around routine. Every morning, he walked the same route through town, wearing the same black hoodie and headphones, listening to podcasts he barely paid attention to anymore. Routine meant control. Routine meant he didn't have to feel. But that morning, something interrupted the rhythm. Rowan noticed the girl on the porch immediately. She was small, barefoot, struggling to drag 2 massive trash bags across cracked wooden boards. Her pale blonde hair hung in tangled strands around her face. Her thin legs were already turning pink in the cold morning air. Rowan slowed without meaning to. From inside the house came another shout, then the sound of something striking flesh. The girl stumbled forward and caught herself against the railing. Still, she didn't cry. Rowan felt something tighten painfully in his chest. Across the street, a man watering his lawn paused, glanced at the porch, then turned his hose back toward the grass. A car rolled past slowly before accelerating around the corner. Everyone saw. No one moved. The girl bent down again, grabbing the trash bags with both hands and trying to work faster. Rowan told himself to keep walking. Families argued, parents yelled. It wasn't his business. He took 2 steps, then 3. But something about the child's silence followed him down the street, like a shadow he could not escape. Rowan finished his walk that morning, but the image of the girl stayed with him. He saw her again when he closed his eyes, bare feet on cold wood. Small hands pulling trash bags too heavy for her, and the way she had not cried after being struck. All day the memory refused to leave. By evening, Rowan drove into town for groceries, telling himself the morning had been nothing more than an unpleasant scene he happened to witness. Briar Glen looked calm again under the warm light of sunset, but when he passed Alder Street, his foot eased off the accelerator. The blue house looked exactly the same, and there was the girl again. Ilara stood alone in the yard, raking leaves into a crooked pile. The wind scattered them almost immediately, forcing her to start over again and again. When she lifted the rake, the sleeve of her shirt slipped down, revealing a dark bruise circling her wrist. Rowan felt his stomach drop. Before he could decide what he was doing, he pulled the car to the curb and stepped out. "Hey," he called gently. The girl froze. She looked toward the house first, as if checking whether someone was watching. Then she turned slowly toward him. "Shouldn't you be in school?" Rowan asked. For a moment she looked frightened. Then her expression changed into something calm and rehearsed. "I stayed home to help my mom," she said quickly. "She's sick." The answer came too smooth, too practiced. Rowan nodded slowly, but he knew a lie when he heard one. From inside the house came loud laughter and another crash. The girl didn't react. That frightened him more than anything else. As Rowan drove away, her quiet voice followed behind him. "Thank you, sir. I'm really okay." But that night, standing at his window and looking down toward the lights of Alder Street, Rowan Mercer realized something unsettling. He didn't believe her, and for the first time in years, he wasn't sure he could pretend he hadn't seen anything. That night, Rowan Mercer couldn't sleep. The farmhouse on Mercer Hill was silent except for the wind moving through the maple trees outside. Usually he liked the quiet. After his wife died, silence had become his closest companion. It kept the world distant and manageable. But tonight the quiet felt different, restless. Rowan stood beside the wide bedroom window looking down at Briar Glen. From the hill the town looked peaceful. Warm lights glowed behind curtains. Families gathered for dinner. Cars passed slowly along the streets. Most houses eventually went dark. One did not. On Alder Street, the upstairs window of the Blue Quinn house remained lit long after midnight. Rowan found himself watching it. He didn't know why. Maybe it was the memory of the girl on the porch. Maybe it was the bruise on her wrist. Maybe it was the way she had said, "I'm really okay," in a voice that sounded anything but. The wind picked up, brushing branches against the glass. Rowan was about to step away when movement caught his eye. The front door of the Quinn house suddenly burst open. A small figure ran outside. Ilara. She was barefoot again, clutching a black trash bag against her chest like a shield. Rain had begun falling thin at first, then harder, splashing across the pavement. Thunder rolled in the distance. Ilara ran to the curb and stopped. For a moment she just stood there, shaking in the storm. Then a voice screamed from inside the house. The door slammed open again. Ilara hesitated. Slowly she walked back inside. The door closed behind her. The street returned to silence. Rowan stayed at the window long after the rain softened, and for the first time in years he felt something he had spent a decade trying to avoid: responsibility. The next afternoon, Rowan tried to forget what he had seen. He answered emails, reviewed documents for one of the companies he still advised, and walked through his quiet house as if routine alone could erase the images in his mind. It didn't work. By early evening, he drove into town. The sky hung low and gray after the storm, and the streets of Briar Glen smelled of wet leaves and cold pavement. Rowan stopped at the small corner store on Oak Avenue to buy tea and batteries, things he didn't really need. The bell above the door jingled as he stepped inside, and then he heard her voice. "I think I have enough." Ilara stood at the counter on tiptoe, pushing a small pile of coins toward the cashier with both hands. Beside the coins sat a loaf of bread and a tiny carton of milk. The cashier, an older man named Lou, who had worked there for decades, cleared his throat gently. "Sweetheart, you're still short." Ilara looked down at the coins, counting them again quickly. Before she could speak, the door behind her slammed open. Cheryl Quinn staggered into the store, rain dripping from her hair. A bottle stuck out from the top of the paper bag in her hand. "I said vodka," she barked loudly, "not milk." Ilara's shoulders stiffened. They didn't have the kind you like, she said softly. Cheryl laughed harshly. Oh, now you're making decisions. She grabbed the bread from the counter and tossed it aside. We don't need this. And you don't need to eat. The milk slipped from Ilara's hands and burst open on the floor. White liquid spread across the tiles. Ilara whispered desperately, Please don't make me go home yet. I'll be good. And that was the moment Rowan Mercer stopped being a man who walked past other people's problems. The entire store went quiet. 2 customers near the snack aisle pretended to study the shelves. Lou stood frozen behind the register. Everyone had heard the girl's plea, but no one moved. Cheryl grabbed Ilara's arm and yanked her toward the door. You think anyone wants you? She hissed. You're mine. Ilara slipped on the spilled milk and fell hard on her knee. The sound echoed through the store. Something inside Rowan snapped. Before he even realized what he was doing, he stepped forward and stood directly in front of the exit. That's enough. Cheryl stopped. She squinted at him, confused. Move. Rowan didn't. Behind her, Ilara pushed herself off the floor, slowly, one hand clutching her knee. Her eyes were wide, full of fear and something else. Hope. She's my daughter, Cheryl snapped. I can take her wherever I want. Rowan's voice remained calm. Not like this. Cheryl stepped closer, anger flashing across her face. And who do you think you are? Rowan held her stare. Someone who saw what everyone else keeps pretending not to. Lou finally found his voice. Maybe we should call Officer Holloway. Rowan pulled his phone from his pocket. Yes, he said quietly. Call him. Outside, thunder rolled again over Briar Glen. Cheryl cursed and shoved past a display rack toward the side door, shouting threats as she stormed out into the evening rain. But Ilara didn't watch her leave. She was too busy gripping Rowan's sleeve with both trembling hands. And Rowan knew something important in that moment. The line he had spent years refusing to cross had disappeared. There was no walking away anymore. The sirens arrived 10 minutes later. To Ilara, it felt much longer. She sat in the tiny break room behind the store counter, legs dangling from a plastic chair that squeaked every time she shifted. Lou had wrapped a thin blanket around her shoulders and placed a paper cup of hot chocolate in her hands, though the steam curling upward made her nervous like something alive. Across the room, Rowan Mercer leaned quietly against the counter. He kept a careful distance, not wanting to frighten her. Outside the thin wall of the break room, voices moved through the store. Officer Grant Holloway had arrived and was speaking with the cashier. Other customers were giving statements describing the spilled milk, the shouting, the way the girl had begged not to go home. Ilara stared at the hot chocolate. Her fingers trembled slightly. She just gets mad sometimes, she whispered suddenly. Rowan looked up. It's my fault a lot. Ilara continued quickly, as if repeating something she had practiced many times. I forget things. I mess stuff up. Rowan crossed the room slowly and sat in the chair opposite her. No, he said gently. Getting mad is one thing. Hurting you is another. Ilara didn't answer. She lifted the cup and took a small sip, hiding half her face behind it. Her eyes stayed fixed on the table. Then, after a long moment, she glanced up at Rowan with quiet curiosity. Why do you live in that big house alone? The question caught him off guard. He exhaled slowly. I didn't always live there alone. Ilara waited patiently. Rowan swallowed. My wife and our baby. They died a long time ago. Ilara's fingers tightened around the cup. I'm sorry, she whispered. Rowan nodded. Neither of them spoke again. But something fragile had begun forming between them in the quiet room. When the break room door opened, a woman stepped inside carrying a clipboard. Hi, Ilara, she said softly. My name is Elena Cruz. I'm here to help. Ilara immediately looked toward Rowan. He gave her a small, reassuring nod. Elena knelt beside the chair so she wouldn't tower over the girl. I just need to ask a few questions, okay? Ilara nodded. What's your full name, Ilara Quinn? And how old are you? 9. Elena wrote something down. Do you feel safe going home tonight? The room became very quiet. Ilara looked down at the hot chocolate cup in her hands. Her fingers slowly tightened around the paper rim. Then she shook her head. No. Elena's expression softened. Okay, she said gently. Thank you for telling me the truth. A few minutes later, she stepped outside with Rowan. The evening air smelled of rain and wet pavement. Officer Holloway leaned against his patrol car, writing notes. She'll be placed in emergency foster care tonight, Elena explained quietly. It's the safest option for now. Rowan glanced back through the store window. Ilara sat alone in the break room chair, hugging the blanket around her shoulders. Where will she go? He asked. Elena hesitated. We're pretty overloaded right now, she admitted. Probably a temporary foster home in the next county. Will it be stable? We try our best, she said carefully. But sometimes kids get moved a few times before we find the right placement. Rowan felt a slow ache form in his chest. Moved, like luggage. Inside the store, Ilara shifted in the chair and rubbed her eyes, fighting sleep. Before the door closed, Rowan heard her murmur softly to herself. Please, not another stranger. The words stayed with him long after Elena finished speaking. Rowan stood outside the corner store, staring through the glass. Ilara had fallen asleep in the break room chair. Her small head rested against the wall, the blanket slipping off one shoulder. The hot chocolate cup sat forgotten on the table beside her. Even in sleep, her fingers curled tightly around the edge of the chair, as if she were afraid something might pull her away. Rowan had seen that kind of tension before. It lived in people who had learned the world could shift beneath them without warning. Elena stepped beside him. She'll be okay, she said quietly. Rowan didn't answer right away. He thought about the girl on the porch that morning, the bruise on her wrist, the way she had said, I'm really okay, like a line memorized from a script. And now that whisper in the break room. Please, not another stranger. What happens next? Rowan asked finally. We take her to a temporary placement tonight, Elena said. Then the investigation continues. Rowan exhaled slowly. What if there was another option? Elena studied him. What do you mean? Rowan hesitated. He had spent years avoiding responsibility for anyone except himself. His life was quiet, controlled, safe. But the image of that small girl sleeping in the chair made something inside him shift. I have space, he said. Elena raised an eyebrow. A lot of space. Mr. Mercer, she said carefully, emergency fostering isn't something people usually volunteer for overnight. I know. There will be background checks, court hearings, inspections. I understand. Elena looked at him for a long moment. Why would you do this? Rowan glanced through the window again. Ilara stirred slightly in her sleep. Because he said quietly, someone should have done it sooner. And in that moment, Rowan Mercer crossed a line that would change both of their lives forever. The Briar Glen courthouse smelled like old wood and paper. Rowan Mercer sat at a long table beside Elena Cruz, while morning light filtered through tall windows. The courtroom was quiet except for the faint shuffle of papers and the low murmur of voices. Across the room sat Cheryl Quinn. Her hair was messy, her eyes bloodshot, and anger radiated from her like heat. Beside her stood a lawyer from Montpelier who looked annoyed to be there at all. Behind Rowan, Officer Holloway leaned against the wall. Near the front row, Ilara sat beside a child advocate clutching the small stuffed fox Elena had given her the night before. Her legs swung nervously beneath the chair. Every few seconds she glanced toward Rowan, just to make sure he was still there. The judge entered the courtroom. Court is now in session. Everyone stood. Judge Marion Bell adjusted her glasses and began reviewing the documents in front of her school reports. Witness statements, medical notes, and Officer Holloway's incident report. The silence stretched for nearly a minute. Then Cheryl's lawyer stood. Your Honor, my client believes this situation has been exaggerated. Mr. Mercer is not related to the child and has inserted himself emotionally into a private family matter. Cheryl crossed her arms, glaring across the room. He's trying to steal my kid, she muttered loudly. Elena rose calmly. Your Honor, the evidence clearly shows repeated neglect, truancy, and physical harm. Multiple witnesses confirmed the incident yesterday. The judge raised a hand for silence. Her eyes turned toward Rowan. Mr. Mercer, you are requesting temporary guardianship of this child. Yes, Your Honor. You understand that this means full responsibility for her safety and well-being until the investigation concludes, I understand. You also understand this could become a long legal process. Rowan didn't hesitate. Yes. The judge nodded slowly. Then she looked toward Ilara. Do you feel safe with Mr. Mercer? Ilara swallowed. Her voice was small but clear. Yes, ma'am. And do you feel safe going home with your mother today? The courtroom held its breath. Ilara gripped the stuffed fox tightly. No, ma'am. The judge closed the file in front of her. Temporary guardianship is granted. Cheryl exploded out of her chair. But Ilara didn't look at her. She was staring only at Rowan. Rowan's farmhouse sat on a hill overlooking Briar Glen. From the outside, it looked peaceful, wide porch, tall maple trees, windows glowing with warm yellow light. But inside, Rowan had lived alone for nearly 10 years. Until tonight. Ilara stepped through the front door slowly. Her small shoes squeaked against the wooden floor as she looked around the house like someone entering a museum. This is big, she whispered. Rowan smiled faintly. It used to feel bigger. He showed her the kitchen first, then the living room with its stone fireplace, then the hallway leading to 2 guest bedrooms. When he opened the door to one of them, Ilara froze. The room was simple but bright. A soft bed with a blue blanket, a small desk beside the window, shelves filled with books Rowan had bought that afternoon, without really knowing what children like to read. This one is yours, Rowan said gently. Ilara stepped inside. Her fingers brushed the blanket like she was testing if it was real. For me if you want it. She nodded slowly. That night, Rowan lay awake listening to the unfamiliar sound of another person in the house. Footsteps in the hallway, the quiet creak of a door. Around 3 a.m., he heard something else. Soft movement in the living room. When he walked downstairs, he found Ilara curled up on the couch clutching the stuffed fox. Her eyes were open. You couldn't sleep? Rowan asked. She shook her head. The house is too quiet. Rowan understood that. Fear sometimes grows louder in silence. He walked to the kitchen and returned with 2 cups of warm tea. They sat together without talking for a long time. Outside, wind moved through the trees. Inside the farmhouse, something new had begun. Not trust. Not yet. But the possibility of it. The first few weeks were strange for both of them. Rowan had built his life around independence. Ilara had built hers around survival. Now they had to learn something completely new. How to live together. Elena Cruz visited regularly, checking the house and making sure everything was stable. Rowan also met with a child trauma counselor named Dr. Naomi Shah, who explained things Rowan had never considered before. Ilara may hide food, Dr. Shah told him. She may apologize constantly. She may panic if you're late coming home. None of that means she doesn't trust you. It means she's learned to expect the worst. Rowan listened carefully. At home, he began building routines. Breakfast every morning, school at 8, homework at the kitchen table, dinner together. The first time Ilara opened the refrigerator without asking permission, she froze halfway through the motion. I'm sorry, she said quickly. Rowan blinked. For what? For taking food. You don't need permission, Rowan said. She stared at him. Really, really. Another night, Rowan came home 10 minutes later than usual after a meeting. When he opened the door, he found Alara standing in the hallway with tears in her eyes. "I thought you weren't coming back," she whispered. Rowan felt something tighten painfully in his chest. He knelt in front of her. "I will always come back." Alara searched his face carefully, like someone testing a bridge before stepping onto it. Slowly, she nodded. That night, she placed a drawing on the refrigerator door with a magnet. Rowan noticed it the next morning. The drawing showed a small farmhouse on a hill beneath a red maple tree. Two stick figures stood in front of the house. Above them, written in uneven letters, were two simple words, "My home." Rowan stared at the picture for a long time, because for the first time in years, the empty farmhouse on Mercer Hill didn't feel empty anymore. Winter arrived slowly in Briar Glen, but healing did not arrive quietly. At first, life inside Rowan Mercer's farmhouse seemed calm. Alara went to school every morning. Rowan made breakfast, usually toast, eggs, and orange juice, and drove her down the hill before heading back to his office. They ate dinner together in the evenings. They watched old movies sometimes. From the outside, it looked like everything was getting better. But healing never moves in a straight line. Some nights, Alara woke up screaming. The first time it happened, Rowan nearly fell out of bed running down the hallway. Her bedroom door was half open, and the lamp inside had been knocked to the floor. Alara sat on the bed, shaking the stuffed fox pressed tightly to her chest. "She's coming," she gasped. Rowan stopped a few steps away so he wouldn't startle her. "No one's coming." Alara looked around the room as if she expected the walls themselves to disagree. "She said if I told anyone she'd find me," Alara whispered. Rowan felt a cold weight settle in his stomach. He knelt beside the bed. "You're safe here." The words sounded simple, but he understood something important in that moment. Safety wasn't something Alara believed yet. Safety had to be proven. Night after night. Day after day. One evening, Rowan attended a meeting with Dr. Naomi Shaw. "She's doing better," Rowan said. "But the nightmares..." Dr. Shaw nodded gently. "Children who grow up in abusive homes live in a constant state of alertness. Their brains don't know how to relax yet." "How long will it take?" Rowan asked. "There's no exact timeline," Dr. Shaw said. "But the fact that she's having nightmares now actually means something good." Rowan frowned. "Why? Because she finally feels safe enough to remember." That answer stayed with him. The following week, Rowan noticed another change. Alara began drawing again. She spent hours at the kitchen table with colored pencils and paper spread everywhere. At first, the drawings were dark storm clouds, houses with no windows, figures with angry red lines around them. But slowly, the pictures changed. More sunlight. More trees. One afternoon, Rowan came home from work and found a new drawing taped to the refrigerator. This one showed the farmhouse on Mercer Hill. A small girl stood beside a tall man beneath a maple tree. Above them were the words, "My safe place." Rowan stood there for a long time, because it was the first time Alara had used that word. Safe. And for the first time since she had entered his life, Rowan felt something close to hope. But outside the quiet farmhouse, the real battle was only beginning, because Cheryl Quinn was not done fighting. 3 weeks later, Rowan received the phone call he had been expecting. Elena Cruz sounded tired. "She's appealing the custody decision." Rowan closed his eyes briefly. Of course she was. Cheryl Quinn had spent most of her life blaming other people for the consequences of her choices. Losing custody of Alara had only made her angrier. "What does the appeal mean?" Rowan asked. "It means another court hearing," Elena said. "She's claiming you manipulated the situation." Rowan almost laughed. "Manipulated?" "She says you used your influence to turn the town against her." Rowan leaned back in his chair. "What does the evidence say?" "The evidence still says she abused her child." That should have ended the conversation. But the legal system rarely moves as cleanly as people expect. The hearing was scheduled for the following month. When Rowan told Alara, she didn't react right away. They were sitting at the kitchen table doing homework. "She wants me back?" Alara asked quietly. "Yes." Alara stared at the math worksheet in front of her. "I don't want to go back." Rowan felt the weight of those words. "You won't have to. But what if the judge says I do?" Rowan hesitated, because honesty mattered more than comfort. "Then we fight it." Alara looked up at him. Her eyes were searching his face for something deeper than reassurance. "You won't give up?" The question hurt more than Rowan expected. "No." She nodded slowly. For the next few weeks, the tension in the farmhouse grew. Rowan met regularly with Elena and lawyers. Teachers provided reports about Alara's improvement at school. Dr. Shah wrote a detailed psychological evaluation describing the trauma Alara had experienced. Even Officer Holloway submitted testimony about what he had witnessed the night at the store. The town had finally begun speaking. Neighbors who had once stayed silent admitted they had heard shouting and crashing noises from the Quinn house for years. Lou, the cashier, wrote a statement describing the scene with the spilled milk. The story that Briar Glen had tried to ignore was now impossible to hide. Still, Rowan knew something important. Courtrooms did not run on emotion. They ran on proof, and proof had to be stronger than anger. The night before the hearing, Alara couldn't sleep. Rowan found her sitting by the living room window watching snow fall across the hill. "What if she lies?" Alara asked. "She probably will," Rowan said calmly. "Then how do we win?" Rowan thought for a moment. "By telling the truth." Alara watched the snow drifting across the dark sky. After a long silence, she whispered something Rowan would never forget. "I didn't think grown-ups were allowed to tell the truth about things like this." Rowan looked at her. "They are," he said. "Sometimes they just forget." The courtroom was packed the morning of the hearing. Word had spread through Briar Glen, and people who had once turned their heads away now sat quietly in the back rows. Cheryl Quinn entered with her lawyer, her expression full of anger and determination. She pointed at Rowan immediately. "He stole my child," she said loudly. The judge silenced her quickly. The hearing lasted nearly 3 hours. Witness after witness spoke. Lou described the night in the store. Officer Holloway explained the police report. Elena Cruz presented the CPS investigation. Dr. Shah outlined the psychological damage Alara had suffered. Finally, the judge looked toward Rowan. "Mr. Mercer, why did you step in that night?" Rowan stood. He could feel dozens of eyes on him. "I saw a child who needed help," he said simply. That's all. Rowan hesitated. Then he added something he hadn't planned to say. "I also saw a town that had looked away for too long." The courtroom went quiet. The judge turned toward Alara. "Do you wish to say anything?" Alara looked terrified, but she stood anyway. Her voice trembled at first. "My mom says I'm a burden," she said softly. Cheryl rolled her eyes, but Alara kept going. "Mr. Mercer never says that." The courtroom remained silent. "He makes breakfast every morning," Alara continued. "And he waits for me to get on the school bus." Her hands were shaking now. "But the biggest thing—" She swallowed. "The biggest thing is he comes home every night." Rowan felt his throat tighten, because Alara had just described something he had never considered heroic. Consistency. The judge closed the file in front of her. When she finally spoke, her voice was calm but firm. "Permanent guardianship of Alara Quinn will remain with Rowan Mercer." Cheryl shouted in protest, but Alara didn't hear her. She was already running across the courtroom. When she reached Rowan, she hugged him tightly, and for the first time since the night he saw her on that porch, Alara Quinn cried. Not from fear, from relief. After the final court ruling, winter slowly loosened its grip on Briar Glen. Snow melted along the sidewalks, revealing damp grass and the first stubborn shoots of spring pushing through the soil. Life in the town began to move forward again. Cars returning to the streets earlier in the morning, children riding bikes after school, neighbors standing on porches talking about the warmer days ahead. Inside the farmhouse on Mercer Hill, life moved forward too. But it didn't happen in dramatic moments. It happened in quiet ones. The first ordinary miracle came one Saturday morning. Rowan woke up to the sound of music. Not loud music, just a soft humming drifting down the hallway. At first he thought it was coming from the radio in the kitchen, but when he stepped out of his bedroom, he realized the sound was coming from Ilara's room. She was singing, not a real song, just a tune she seemed to be inventing while she worked on something. Rowan stood in the hallway for a moment listening. When Ilara had first arrived at the farmhouse, silence followed her everywhere. She moved quietly, spoke carefully, and often looked like she expected someone to yell at her for existing. Now she was humming. It was a small change, but Rowan knew how big it really was. Later that morning, he found her sitting on the floor in the living room, surrounded by colored pencils and paper. Sunlight from the large windows spilled across the rug, lighting up the mess of drawings scattered around her. "What are you working on?" Rowan asked. Ilara looked up, slightly embarrassed. "Just stuff." Rowan picked up one of the drawings. It showed a large tree on top of a hill with a small house beneath it. Two stick figures stood in front of the house. One was tall with dark hair. The other was smaller, wearing a purple sweater. Rowan recognized the place immediately. "That's Mercer Hill," he said. Ilara nodded. "I like it there." Rowan sat down across from her. "You know something," he said. "What I like it there, too." Ilara smiled faintly. That afternoon, Rowan took her into town to buy groceries. At the store, a few people recognized them and nodded politely. Others offered quiet smiles. A month earlier, Rowan might have noticed the attention and felt uncomfortable. But now he was too focused on something else. Ilara was choosing cereal, very seriously. She studied the shelves for nearly 2 minutes before finally selecting a brightly colored box. "Is this okay?" she asked. Rowan looked at the cereal box. "It's your breakfast," he said. "You get to decide." Ilara hesitated. "You mean every day, every day?" She held the box for a moment as if it were something precious. Then she placed it in the cart. Later that evening, they cooked dinner together. Rowan handled the stove while Ilara carefully set the table. She lined up the plates and silverware with almost military precision. "You don't have to be that careful," Rowan said gently. Ilara paused. "I'm used to it." Rowan nodded. Habits built from fear didn't disappear overnight, but they could change. After dinner, they washed dishes together. Rowan dried while Ilara stacked plates in the cabinet. When they finished, Ilara stood in the kitchen doorway watching him. "Can I ask something?" she said. "Of course." She looked nervous suddenly. "What happens if I mess up again?" Rowan frowned slightly. "What do you mean, like, if I forget chores or break something or get bad grades?" Rowan leaned against the counter. "Ilara," he said quietly, "that's called being a kid." She studied his face carefully, as if trying to determine whether he was joking. "And you won't get mad, I might get annoyed," Rowan admitted. "But I won't stop caring about you." Ilara absorbed that slowly, because it was a new concept. Adults in her past had always made affection conditional. Do the right thing. Stay quiet. Don't cause problems. Or love disappears. Rowan's version of love didn't work that way. Later that night, Ilara returned to the kitchen with another drawing. She placed it on the refrigerator door with a magnet. This one showed the farmhouse again, but the picture was brighter than the earlier ones. The tree was covered in green leaves. Birds flew across the sky. And the two figures standing in front of the house were holding hands. Above the drawing, she had written 3 uneven words. "Our home now." Rowan stared at the picture for a long moment. because something extraordinary had happened without either of them noticing. The frightened girl who once begged not to go home had started to believe she finally had one. And Rowan Mercer, who had spent 10 years convincing himself that his life was over, had quietly become a father. Spring settled gently over Briar Glen. Snow had melted completely from the hills, and the maple trees surrounding Rowan Mercer's farmhouse were slowly turning green again. The air smelled fresh, carrying the quiet promise that winter had finally passed. For Alara, the change of seasons felt strange. Winter had been the first time in her life she spent months without fear following her through every room of the house. Now the world outside was warming, and for the first time in years, her body was learning how to relax. But healing didn't erase everything. Some fears stayed hidden inside small moments. One evening, Rowan returned home later than usual. Traffic from a meeting in Montpellier had slowed him down, and by the time he reached Mercer Hill, the sky had already turned deep orange with sunset. When he opened the front door, the house was quiet. Too quiet. "Alara," he called. No answer. Rowan set his keys down and walked toward the living room. He found her sitting on the couch with the stuffed fox in her lap. The television was on, but the volume was muted. Her eyes were fixed on the front door. Waiting. "You're late," she said quietly. Rowan noticed the tension in her shoulders immediately. "I know. I'm sorry." Alara nodded, but she didn't look relieved. "I thought maybe you weren't coming back." The words hit Rowan harder than he expected. He crossed the room and sat down across from her. "I will always come back," he said gently. Alara looked down at the fox. "That's what people say." Rowan understood what she meant. Promises had never meant much in her old house. He didn't try to argue. Instead, he reached for the remote and turned the television volume up slightly. The quiet hum of the room returned, filling the empty space between them. After a few minutes, Alara spoke again. "I told June something today." Rowan raised an eyebrow. "What did you tell her?" Alara hesitated. "I told her I live with my dad." Rowan felt the words land in the room like something fragile. "Oh," he said softly. Alara looked nervous now, studying his face carefully. "I know you're not really my dad," she said quickly. "I just didn't know what else to call you." Rowan leaned forward, resting his elbows on his knees. "Alara." She looked up. "If you want to call me that," he said, "you can." Her eyes widened slightly. "Really, yes." She held his gaze for several seconds. Then something changed in her expression, something warmer, softer. "Okay," she whispered. Rowan smiled faintly. They sat together quietly for a while longer as the sun disappeared beyond the hills. Outside, the evening wind moved through the trees surrounding the farmhouse. Inside, the house felt different somehow. Not just quieter, fuller. Because sometimes family didn't begin with blood. Sometimes it began with a small, brave word spoken in a living room at sunset. And that night, for the first time, Alara Quinn fell asleep, knowing exactly what to call the man who had refused to walk away from her life. Summer arrived in Briar Glen with long golden evenings and the sound of cicadas humming in the trees around Mercer Hill. The farmhouse windows stayed open most days, letting warm air drift through the rooms. For Rowan Mercer, the house had never felt more alive. For Alara, summer felt like something entirely new. She had never really experienced one before. In the past, summer meant being home all day in the Quinn house, trying to stay quiet while her mother slept off long nights of drinking. It meant finding ways to entertain herself without making noise, without asking for food, too often without doing anything that might trigger another outburst. But this summer was different. Rowan signed her up for the Briar Glen Community Day Camp. The first morning, she stood in the kitchen doorway, wearing a borrowed baseball cap and a purple backpack, filled with sunscreen, a water bottle, and a packed lunch Rowan had carefully prepared. "You don't have to go if you don't want to," Rowan said. Alara shook her head. "I want to try." Rowan drove her down the hill and parked beside the town park. Dozens of kids were already running across the grass, laughing, chasing each other between the playground equipment. Ilara stared through the windshield. "That many kids," she whispered. Rowan smiled slightly. "Yeah, that many." For a moment she looked overwhelmed. Then she took a deep breath. "Okay." Rowan watched as she stepped out of the car and walked slowly toward the group. At first she stayed near the edge of the field, uncertain where she belonged. But a few minutes later, June Carter spotted her and waved excitedly. "Ilara over here." Within seconds, June had dragged her into a game of tag. Rowan stayed in the parking lot longer than he meant to, watching from a distance. Eventually, he saw something that made him smile. Ilara was running, not carefully, not cautiously, just running. Later that afternoon, Rowan picked her up. She climbed into the car, flushed and out of breath, her hair messy from the wind. "How was it?" Rowan asked. Ilara grinned. "I got tagged 3 times. That sounds terrible. It was awesome." Rowan laughed quietly. As they drove back toward Mercer Hill, Ilara watched the road pass beneath the tires. Dad Rowan glanced over. "Yes," she hesitated. "Do families always do stuff like this? Like what? Like pack lunches and pick people up from places and ask how their day was?" Rowan thought for a moment. "The good ones do." Ilara nodded slowly, looking out the window again. That evening they sat on the porch watching the sunset over Briar Glen. The sky turned orange and pink above the hills, while crickets began their nighttime chorus. Ilara swung her legs over the edge of the wooden step. "Hey, Dad." Yes, she pointed toward the town below. "Do you think we'll stay here a long time?" Rowan followed her gaze. Briar Glen looked peaceful in the fading light. "I hope so," he said. Ilara leaned back against the porch railing. "Me too." For the first time in her life, the future didn't feel like something she had to survive. It felt like something she could actually look forward to. And Rowan Mercer realized something else that evening as the last light faded from the sky. Saving Ilara had changed her life, but it had also quietly saved his. By the time autumn returned to Briar Glen, nearly a year had passed since the night Rowan Mercer stepped between Ilara and the door of that corner store. Life had changed in quiet, steady ways. Ilara had grown taller. Her hair, once dull and tangled, now fell neatly past her shoulders. She laughed more easily, spoke more confidently, and moved through the farmhouse on Mercer Hill as if she truly belonged there. But healing never erased the past completely. Sometimes it only made the scars easier to see. One afternoon in early October, Rowan arrived at the elementary school for a parent meeting. The hallway buzzed with voices as families waited outside classrooms. Parents chatted with teachers while children showed off artwork taped to the walls. Rowan stood near the doorway of Ilara's classroom, scanning the colorful drawings lining the hallway. Most were typical school projects: pumpkins, houses, smiling families drawn with oversized stick figures. But one picture caught his attention. It showed a small girl standing beside a large tree on a hill. Next to her was a tall man. Above them, written carefully in purple crayon, were the words, "My family." Rowan smiled. At that moment, the classroom door opened, and Ilara rushed into the hallway. "Dad." She ran straight into him, wrapping her arms around his waist before remembering where they were. Her cheeks flushed slightly as other parents glanced over. "Sorry," she said quickly. Rowan laughed softly. "You're allowed to hug me." Ilara stepped back, smiling. Her teacher approached a moment later. "Mr. Mercer, it's good to see you again." "Likewise," Rowan said. The teacher lowered her voice slightly. "Ilara has been doing wonderfully this year. Her grades are strong and she participates in class discussions now." Rowan nodded. "That's good to hear. But there's something else I wanted to mention." The teacher glanced toward Ilara, who was showing June one of the classroom posters. "Sometimes when another child raises their voice, suddenly Ilara still freezes," the teacher said gently. "Just for a second." Rowan felt the familiar ache in his chest. Does it happen often, less than it used to? Rowan looked across the hallway. Alara was laughing with June now. You're doing an incredible job with her, the teacher added quietly. Rowan shook his head. She's doing the hard part. The meeting ended shortly after. As Rowan and Alara walked toward the car, leaves crunched beneath their shoes. Did I do okay? Alara asked. You did great. She nodded, satisfied. They drove back toward Mercer Hill as the sun dipped lower behind the trees. Halfway home, Alara spoke again. Dad, yes, do you think people ever stop being scared of things? Rowan thought carefully. Sometimes the fear never disappears completely. Alara looked out the window. Then how do you deal with it? Rowan turned onto the gravel road leading up the hill. You learn something stronger than the fear. What? He glanced at her. Trust. Alara considered that for a moment. Then she smiled. Good, she said, because I think I'm starting to learn that. And Rowan realized something important as the farmhouse came into view at the top of the hill. The scars from Alara's past would always exist, but they no longer defined the direction of her future. Because now she had something she had never truly had before. A family that stayed. Winter returned to Briar Glen quietly. Snow covered the rooftops and softened the narrow streets, turning the small town into something that looked almost like a postcard. At Mercer Hill, the farmhouse windows glowed warmly against the early darkness. Inside, Alara sat at the kitchen table finishing her homework, while Rowan washed dishes at the sink. It had been nearly 2 years since the night at the corner store. 2 years since Rowan stepped between her and the door. Life had settled into something steady now, school dinners together, quiet evenings watching old movies. The kind of rhythm that slowly taught a child the world could be safe. But sometimes the past still appeared in unexpected ways. One afternoon, Rowan received a letter from the state correctional facility. Cheryl Quinn had requested permission to write to her daughter. Rowan sat at the kitchen table holding the envelope for a long time. That evening, he told Alara. She listened silently. Do you want to read it? Rowan asked gently. Alara shook her head. No. You don't have to decide right now. I already decided. She looked out the window toward the snow-covered hill. I spent a long time wishing she would change, Alara said quietly. But I don't need that anymore. Rowan studied her carefully. Are you sure? Alara turned back toward him. Yes. She walked across the kitchen and wrapped her arms around him. I already have the parent I need. Rowan closed his eyes for a moment. Outside, snow drifted quietly through the night. Inside the farmhouse on Mercer Hill, something invisible finally settled. For the first time since the day she ran barefoot into the rain, Alara Quinn stopped waiting for the past to return. She had already found where she belonged. 10 years later, Briar Glen looked much the same. The maple trees still lined the streets, their leaves turning brilliant shades of red and gold every autumn. The small town still moved at its familiar, gentle pace. But one life had changed in ways no one could have predicted. On a bright June afternoon, rows of chairs filled the high school courtyard as families gathered for graduation. At the center of the stage stood Alara Mercer, 18 years old, wearing a navy cap and gown with gold honor cords draped across her shoulders. From the front row, Rowan Mercer watched with quiet pride. A little older now. A little grayer at the temples, but smiling. When Alara stepped to the microphone as valedictorian, the courtyard fell silent. She looked out across the crowd for a moment, before her eyes found Rowan. Some of us grow up in houses that don't feel like homes, she began. But sometimes, someone sees you. Her voice steadied, and instead of looking away, they stay. Rowan felt his throat tighten. Alara smiled softly. I'm standing here today because one man chose not to walk past me. Later, beneath the same maple trees that had watched their story begin, Alara hugged him tightly. "We did it, Dad," she whispered. Rowan smiled. "No," he said gently. "You did." Did this story touch your heart? Let us know how you felt. Rate it from 1 to 10 in the comments below if it moved. You please like, share, and subscribe to support the channel. Don't forget to tap the bell so you never miss our next heartfelt story. Click the end screen to watch more emotional journeys. See you in the next one.